Hey everybody, welcome back to Backlog Banter. I'm joined as usual by Tucker, and we are here to chat with you about an upcoming, hotly anticipated Nintendo title. And unfortunately, it's not Pikmin 3 Deluxe today,
No.
because actually, as of the time we're recording this, it's already out, and you'll be getting impressions from me on that shortly. But right now, you'll be getting impressions from both of us on Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, which just got a demo
Yep.
after the most recent partner showcase. Card in the corner, not to our reaction, but to
No.
Tucker's control reaction
Oh,
because
really?
because there are some reactions on the internet that I watch constantly, and this has become one of them. And I'm not
Wow.
kidding.
I'm very happy
I
to
fucking
hear
love
that.
that
Yeah.
video. But Tucker, we've both played some of Age of Calamity.
Yeah.
Um,
Some being the key
some.
for me,
Right.
especially.
You got incredibly close to the end.
Okay. Was
Yep.
that the last cutscene that I was gonna do? But let me reiterate for the audience
Sure.
here. I had a hard time playing a lot of it yesterday, so I spent my morning playing it this morning, the Age of Calamity demo, and I was getting through that goddamn Guardian fight, which is hard. That is a hard fight. I'm having a very tough time with that. And I was texting Abram in all caps that I was having a hard time with it. And I sat on my controller and kicked myself out of the mission. So I have to completely redo it, which I do not want to do right now.
Were you trying to actually fight him, or are you doing the mini guardians to blow him up?
Well, I already activated them, and then I was on the fight after that.
Oh. Yeah, because I fought him before. I was like, the game can go fuck itself. I'm gonna fight the Guardian.
Yeah, no, I was not doing that.
And I got about probably a quarter of his health. Then I'm like, I just can't.
No.
Like it's clearly possible, but I'm not going to do this. I'm simply not going to.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, so we both played some of the demo. You finished that, and then there's a cutscene, and then boom, you're at the end. That it's actually
okay.
it's a very important cutscene. So I'm gonna run it
Damn it.
down for you really quickly.
Okay, all right.
Essentially, you beat that mission. You find Robbie and Pura. You
Mhm.
talk to
I
them.
assumed, yeah.
The little baby guardian communicates with the fucking Sheikah slate, and you see on the Sheikah slate some of the data that Robbie has decrypted from the baby guardian, and
Mhm.
you see Hyrule Castle under the control of Calamity Ganon, like you do in Breath of the Wild 1.
Sure.
Zelda looks at that and she's like, man, I gotta do whatever I can to stop this from happening.
Yeah.
We can't fail because I can't let this happen. So essentially all that happens, and all is, I mean, that's very important. Basically, it's a reveal to the characters that they lose,
Yeah.
and them saying that they want to do whatever they can to stop that. So, yeah, we both played the demo.
Mhm.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'm
I
having a good time with it. I was not originally
Yeah.
because I did not understand the controls at all. They just throw you in, and there's like occasionally a button prompt where like you can do this, and then I would like be like, "What? How?" And but I eventually figured it out, and I started getting the hang of there's different kinds of button combos that allow you to do more unique attacks that can attack more people or things like that. And at that point, and once I was unlocking more characters to send around the map and things like that, I started having a better time. But when I first got into it, let me tell you, I was like, I
Sure.
don't understand what's going on.
I am more. I think the bottom line is my expectations have been set accordingly, having played the demo now.
Mm-hmm.
I am not as excited about the game as I was before, having not played it, but I think that I now am in the right framework to enjoy the game for what it is,
Mm-hmm.
instead of what it clearly is shaping up to not be.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of want to talk in two lanes. I want to talk about the story, and I want to talk about
Yep.
the gameplay.
Sure.
Um, let's start with the gameplay. How about
Why not?
if you oblige me that much?
I shall.
First things first. I am astonished by the fact that I'm seeing people on Twitter defending the frame rate of this game.
I didn't have any issues with the frame rate.
Uh, okay, that's very interesting to me.
I
But
legitimately did not.
I think part of it is the fact that the other Warriors games ran significantly better.
Okay.
Those were at 60. This is not even 30 a lot of the times.
Sure.
And you will get adjusted to it. I
Mm-hmm.
think the biggest sin a game can have is not a low frame rate, but an inconsistent frame rate.
Yeah.
Like Breath of the Wild's ridiculously fluctuating frame rate was really jarring.
Yeah.
This was jarring for the first little bit. I found it not sickening, but it just felt choppy. It didn't feel smooth. In a game like this, I really think smoothness is important. At the
Yeah.
same time, this the game is out in a month, but that's enough time to push a patch. It's enough time to optimize some stuff.
Yeah. Hopefully.
I really hope so. I've seen a lot of people online talking about this frame rate, which is frustrating and disappointing. But other than that, I don't have many issues with the gameplay because I think it's a special gameplay experience. I think it's really quite good.
Yeah, no, I was enjoying it a lot. As I said, I genuinely did not have any problems with the frame rate. Maybe my fucking brain just processes thing at 30 FPS instead of 60. But I was confused by the fact that people were saying it was bad online because I did not experience that from my perspective. But when it got to the gameplay and I was confused, but eventually I got around to it, I was starting to understand a little bit more what exactly I'm supposed to do, what the goal of different combos and collecting the different things. It was sort of overwhelming at first because they throw a
Sure.
lot at you, especially considering how many items you can pick up and how many enemies they throw at you, obviously. And not being experienced with any of the Muso games, I did not know what was going on. But I think that this game's strongest suit, especially for someone like me who has not been experienced with the gameplay format of the Muso series at all, is how it incorporates all of the Breath of the Wild elements in new and exciting ways. It expands the idea of the runes, the four runes, stasis, cryonis, the fucking bombs, and magnesis, and just spins them in all sorts of different directions. And every character has a different way to use all of them, and I think that's really cool. And even incorporating things like the paraglider, which you can use for fast movement, which is cool. Incorporating the Korok seeds in a different way. I think that there's a lot to look into here, but I'm mostly excited to see how the game's mechanics and implementation of Breath of the Wild stuff expand over the course of the full game.
So I don't think it's going to,
Okay.
and I think that's an important thing to contextualize because what's interesting about the Musou games is that they throw a lot at you, but you quickly recognize what's important, what's not, and what is actually going to lead to progression, which will unlock a lot of is new combos. You'll get some cool new weapons. But
Sure.
I'm pretty sure we've seen the extent to the Breath of the Wild implementation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to that effect, I think the game looks great. I hope that the demo helped people clarify what about this game is Zelda and what about it is as a Warriors title.
Yeah. Well, there's not much Zelda.
No, there's really not. I do think some people, I love Arlo, but I think some people are overselling these Zelda aspects of this.
Sure.
I think just inherently the way you move in a Musou game doesn't make itself conducive to exploration. I don't think
No.
a lot of things about this game do anything other than service to combat, which is totally fine because I think the combat is really great. It's very similar in a lot of ways to past Musou titles, but it does have some interesting new nuance in the ways that you can use the different rods and you can use the runes, like you were saying. There are some interesting new things here, but they feel more so iterative than really evolutionary. So I found myself, as people will see in the gameplay, being able to really quickly pick this up. And while like I found the flurry rush to be hard to pull off.
I couldn't figure out how to do the dodge at the right time.
Yeah, it did. I mean, it's not the same as Breath of the Wild, so I found myself like getting hit a lot because I was trying to stand still and figure out the timing. I couldn't quite do it.
Yeah, me too.
But on the whole, this felt really familiar, which is nice. It is Hyrule Warriors again in a lot of ways, and that the aesthetic does help freshen things up a little bit. But I was immediately reminded why I loved the first game for 75, 80 hours. I don't think I'm gonna love the same formula for another 75, 80 hours here.
Sure.
But I do think it's certainly going to carry me through the game because it's fucking flashy as hell.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. I think the animations and cutscenes and in trailers we saw translate really well to moment gameplay. And it certainly feels empowering. It's a very empowering game, I think.
Yeah. And I think that my notion of the expansion of the Breath of the Wild implements will come from the idea of getting more combos and unlocking more characters to see and seeing the new characters that you are able to play as, including the champions who have their abilities, and the way that they have taken these concepts from the Breath of the Wild combat, like parrying, like dodging, like using the arrow slow-mo in mid-air, like using the paraglider, like using the dodge, like using wall jumps, like there's all this stuff. And the way that they implement them into the animations is what I'm most excited by. Because every time I'm able to usually accidentally, pull off some sort of new combo and have the characters do some sort of crazy animation. I'm like, whoa, okay. I remember what that was kind of like in the original Breath of the Wild, but they've really upped the flashiness and usefulness in this new sort of combat, and I think that's really cool.
It's also a far better implementation than the traditional Zelda items were in the first Hyrule Warriors, because those were incredibly situational. It'd be like, oh, here's some wiggly bushes. Use your boomerang to chop them down. Or, oh, here's a very specific time you're supposed to shoot a Deku Baba with your arrow, right? Inherently, the runes are more versatile in Breath of the Wild, and I think that translates really well to the gameplay here. So I did feel like, especially Link's bow was never that useful.
I only used it a couple times.
Yeah, and maybe it will be a more situational thing. Like I assume at some point you might run into those things from Breath of the Wild Master Mode, where the fucking bokoblins are up on their like hot air balloons. You can.
I also think that there's a high chance that you get access to electric fire bomb arrows, ice arrows, that stuff, which will make it more useful. Yeah, because the normal arrows you don't have like. I never really thought about the bow because unlike the original game, you don't have ammo to worry about with the bow. So it kind of just becomes a thing that you can do occasionally. And also, I don't know, I found the aiming kind of weird. And
I did too.
But yeah. Hopefully the bow becomes a little bit better because I loved the bow in the original Breath of the Wild. That was probably one of the best weapons. But it just seems like an afterthought at this time.
And I mean, I just wanted to fucking chuck remote bombs at everybody instead. If I'm going
that was great.
That's really fun.
Yeah, it is.
It's, of the three characters, because you get to play as Link, Impa, and Zelda, I think Link was my favorite.
Same here.
Followed by Zelda. I don't understand Impa's playstyle.
No, here's the thing. For both of them, I think that there's some sort of deeper understanding of combos that I am not primed for. Because what's it called? You absorb the symbols for Impa's stuff. And I don't know what that means.
I didn't either.
It's like sometimes there will be a glowing bit that you set over an enemy, and I'm like, what? And sometimes you have 3 shadow cleansing shells. Sometimes there's 5. Sometimes the ones on the ends don't attack. I don't understand it. And also same with Zelda. She doesn't seem to have a lot of direct attacks, which was very confusing for me. Your heavy attack just summons 4 blocks of ice, and I never found that useful. But once you were able to work that into her other moves, I was like, okay, I can see what's going on here. But Zelda's moveset, I think, is the flashiest because she combos the runes at like a breakneck pace. Like her special attack, which does stasis, bombs, magnesis, and then like ends it with the cryonics or whatever. I'm like, whoa, what's going on? And it's just a little over the top, but I kind of like it.
Yeah, I think that when you play more, you'll get a better feel for the characters, because part of it for me was the fact that I have so much familiarity with the Musou gameplay that I was able to pretty quickly adapt. Not to Impa's, because I just don't think Impa's make sense. I'm sure once I learn a little bit more, but I really loved chaining together Zelda's moves. But Link was the most traditional. But also, I think the versatility that his implementations of the runes give you have a lot more combo options, because I found myself doing a lot of the same button combinations with Impa and Zelda, but with Link's runes, I could use Cryonis to hop up and paraglide, then slam down onto people. I could use remote bombs. I found myself playing in a lot more varied style than I did with the other characters.
Sure.
So I think he was my favorite. I don't want to spoil you unless you want to be spoiled, but the data mined list of characters looks really fucking cool.
Okay, so I have not heard about that.
Yeah, so I won't talk about it, and to save the audience from spoilers too. Sure. But it seems like we're gonna get some really interesting movesets, because they're already so different just here.
Yeah.
A lot of the characters felt a little bit homogenized in the original Hyrule Warriors in terms of movesets. They were different aesthetically, but they kind of boiled down to a lot of the same bread and butter combos. But this already feels different, so that's really cool. And the maps they were fine. Aesthetically, I think they're great. From a gameplay perspective, they were the same kind of weird, not interactable things that I'm not crazy about in the first Hyrule Warriors game. They feel a little bit stiff, especially with a game that's as freeing as Breath of the Wild. Getting like stuck on a little fucking corner of something because you can't walk over it was a little bit silly.
I mean, there was a lot of moments where I was like, okay, I think I can go up this hill, but no, you can't. Like, you don't really have a jump, to be honest. And you can easily, if you are paragliding, clip off of something because like, no, there's a border there, even though if you can't see it, which is a little bit jarring. But I think once you get more into the combat and you're more focused on that, and you wrap your head around the fact that no, this is not Breath of the Wild, and you cannot just jump whenever you damn well please, or use the climb and the paraglider, which allowed you such a freedom to control the environment in the original game, I'm going to be more comfortable with it. But
Yeah,
it's for me, it's a lot of I need to adapt because
sure.
I'm not used to what's going on.
Yeah, and as someone who was familiar after I beat the first 2 missions, and I kind of dabbled a little bit in like the cooking is very basic. It's just
Yeah, no, it's just press A.
yeah, it's just press A. Same with the weapon fusing. It's very evocative of the subsystems in the past games. I'm gonna keep saying that because this is just a very familiar experience. And I think because of that, without that freshness that I felt the first time, I played the 2 main missions. Like, yeah, I'm good. I'm good here. I don't need to do these little side challenges. And I think when I get the full game, it'll be the thing that I'll probably play a couple missions at a time, put down, come back to,
Yeah,
because I do think that a portion of these games does rely on its freshness, and I just don't have that anymore.
yeah.
So I just found my expectations tempered, and while I did enjoy the gameplay, I wasn't blown away by it. So
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's certainly possible that I end up in the gameplay rut that you did with the first one, where I just get really, really into it because it's my first time playing
yeah,
one of these kinds of games. But I think that's important to in context that a lot of people are going to be playing this as their first Muso game, so
yeah.
this could be something that blows up in popularity, and people I go crazy about how addicting the gameplay is because they haven't experienced it before.
Uh-oh.
I don't know how I'm gonna finish that off, but
But that's okay. I think your general point, as Jerome tries to fuck us over, was that a lot of people will be playing this for the first time, and I think that's really cool because I, for me, Hyrule Warriors, I don't think it's going to get topped, but I think this is a more polished experience in some ways. So I think this is a
sure.
great first Musou game for people to dive into. Um, but I think I want to talk about story now.
Sure.
I am being set up to be disappointed by this narrative, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Immediately, I'm of 2 minds. I'm very glad that they were like, hey, the baby guardian can time travel. We're just going to put this out there immediately. So
Yeah.
this doesn't become a bait and switch. I think it is incredibly obvious that you beat Calamity again at the end of this game.
Yeah. I agree.
And I think that is incredibly disappointing.
I don't care. Doesn't bother me. I think it's gonna be pretty cool. I read you were sending some messages in the Discord
Right.
yesterday about how you think that the story formula might, not connect to one of the other ones, that or it
Yeah.
might end up feeling like it's a side thing that's not impactful. But I think that from my perspective as a new Zelda fan, trying to understand the overall timeline, and also just being someone who is not super. I don't get caught on there being continuous timelines for things. I like
Sure.
I like the variety that comes from there trying to be different timelines and different parallel universes and things of that nature. But I do think that there's a possibility that even though this is not likely not going to be a direct prequel to Breath of the Wild, that this story does have some influence on the sequel. I think that the idea of the
Yes.
time travel might end up, actually, I'm just coming up with this right now, but if the baby guardian somehow reemerges in the sequel, the time travel might become the light world, dark world aspect of Breath of the Wild 2. I think that there is some possibility that the fact that this story does incorporate time travel and the characters interacting in different ways, that it actually does end up impacting the Breath of the Wild story overall. And I think that that could be pretty cool. Even if it does end up being sort of disappointing that it's not just a direct sequel, I think it could end up having more creativity because of the fact that it's not just a direct sequel.
It depends on what the implementation is. We were talking a very little bit in the Discord, and I stopped because I wanted to save it for here.
Yeah.
You brought up the point about the Zelda timeline already being completely fucked, and it
Mm-hmm.
is, but it's important to contextualize the fact that timeline came out in 2011
Sure.
for the series' 25th anniversary, and that was the Zelda team having to arbitrarily stitch together games that were not inherently story connected.
Mm-hmm.
To try to make some kind of semblance of sense, which is why that timeline is a complete joke. Because it's
Yeah.
like, hey, if Link fucking wakes up and there's a cuckoo on the left side of his lawn, then fucking Ganon wins, Like they had to come up with so many contrivances to make that work.
Mm-hmm.
What was exciting about Age of Calamity was that Breath of the Wild is not officially in the timeline anywhere, and Age of Calamity was what?
Yet.
But what I'm saying is Age of Calamity was specifically a story prequel to it.
Mm-hmm.
The other games were connected in an overarching narrative sense only because fans wanted them to be.
Yeah.
This was the first instance where a game was directly tied to another, where we were going to be shown a prequel story. That was basically the appeal of this game. And I think that I'm going to have to take a little bit of a walk here, but I think this is
Okay.
important.
All right.
This, for me, the
Get
story.
my legs warmed up, stretch my
me,
feet.
Yes, you gotta stretch for this one. For me, the story, a true prequel story, was what was really compelling first and foremost about Age of Calamity. The reason being is because the Musou gameplay, as I think you're probably a little bit more familiar with now, is fairly simple.
Yeah.
So the appeal of the original Hyrule Warriors was the way that, in the words of the own developers, it was a celebration of the Zelda series. It allowed you to mash together all of this stuff, and the appeal was getting to experience all these characters in a flashy new way, getting to see Zant and Skull Kid interact, getting to see all these various combinations, right? That was the appeal of this game. Age of Calamity doesn't have that, because Age of Calamity was supposed to be this tailored experience that tells an in-canon story about what happens prior to Breath of the Wild. Now, with the absence of those more fantastical elements, you have a more simplified gameplay system in the Musou gameplay, and then you have the story. And if the story is no longer the true in-canon prequel we thought we were getting, I think that undervalues the story. Like you said, there's a lot of interesting implementations where that could connect to the sequel, but I think specifically in the context of Age of Calamity, the game loses a lot of its appeal for me when it becomes a story that doesn't have much weight to it, and the gameplay is incredibly familiar. Because either I wanted, the traditional 2014 Hyrule Warriors appeal of this is just Zelda overload. That's what's special about this game.
Yeah.
Because it never really was the gameplay. And here, now it was supposed to be, oh, this is this special canon story talking about the events leading up to Breath of the Wild. Now it doesn't look like it's going to be. Maybe it's going to have something interesting for Breath of the Wild 2, but in the moment, I just don't feel like the game has very strong of an appeal for me anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I totally understand that, and I was obviously on the same train as you, that I was excited to get a prequel story to Breath of the Wild that was more directly connected. But as I've played watched the cutscenes, and listened to you talk about what you thought the appeal of the game was going to be, I actually am on the complete opposite side.
Sure.
I'm actually more excited now that this is not just something where, okay, we can expect what to know is going to happen at the end. I think that the idea that, at least in my head canon, this will somehow connect Breath of the Wild 1 and 2. There's a possibility that it won't, but I think that the likelihood of it being connected into a larger story is pretty high. But I think that combined with the fact that it could completely change the course of the second game if we get some sort of twist in this, and also the fact that this is now a story where anything can happen. I think that is pretty cool. I think that the fact that it's going to let us get a better look at these characters in a way that we don't know what's going to happen to them necessarily, I think is actually a bigger draw for me, because it's now not just, okay, the 4 champions are going to die, Zelda's going to be trapped, Link is going to be put to sleep, whatever. That's not the word I was looking for. But I think that now that we don't know what to expect, I'm actually more engaged by the story and more interested to see what happens, especially in the context of the larger Breath of the Wild story.
Yeah, I'm of a couple minds of that. I think that's a compelling idea, but I think it would have been more compelling if the story in Breath of the Wild itself had been more fleshed out.
Yes,
I think the reason that Age of Calamity was exciting is because Breath of the Wild really just teased incredibly interesting things but never gave them to you.
Yeah.
This was going to be them giving that to us. And I think for any franchise, if you're a really big fan, you want to see what's only alluded to. And so I really wanted to see this conflict that set up one of Nintendo's greatest games of all time,
Sure.
And I wanted to see how that unfolds, and the Musou gameplay seemed to be a great match for that. And it's interesting to have such an empowering gameplay experience, then end in defeat. And from a narrative perspective, Nintendo doesn't really do this. Every Zelda game, you triumph. And it was going to be really interesting to not triumph and see what that evokes, how that story gets told. I think that even though it would have been more predictable, it would have filled the holes that we have been wanting filled since 2017 with Breath of the Wild's narrative, but it also would have given us a more interesting structure for how a story is told in a Zelda game. Because overcoming insurmountable odds is fairly familiar for the franchise, fairly familiar for how Nintendo always tells story, and considering Nintendo doesn't tell story very often, getting something with this fidelity, ending where it was going to end, I think was really uniquely compelling.
Yeah. And I think that what's pretty interesting about the way that I'm listening to you talk about this is, and compared to the insane marketing push that this game has had,
Yeah.
is that from our perspective, the game was going to be a Breath of the Wild prequel. It never was. We just didn't know that it wasn't because of their marketing push has been so heavily that, hey, this is the 100 years before story. There is a baby guardian. What does that mean? Now we know.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't necessarily think it's too fair to criticize the game itself for not being that, because it was never going to be a direct Breath of the Wild prequel like the way we thought it was going to be, because it was never designed that way from the beginning. They just didn't properly portray that.
Then I think that's bad communication.
Yeah, so I'm more putting it
yeah.
on their communication and not necessarily the game itself, because I do think it's possible that this is a very
Sure.
compelling story. It just was poorly set in our minds what it was going to be, so our expectations were set differently.
Yeah. And if we had known that from the beginning, I think I always would have hovered around the same level of hype that I have now.
Mhm.
But the way it was presented, the way it was talked about, didn't imply this.
Yeah.
Which just means that, like I said at the beginning of the discussion, my expectations are now set for what this game is going to be and what it's
Mhm.
not going to be. And frankly, I do find myself at this very moment a little bit disappointed, and definitely going to pick up the game, definitely excited to play through those gameplay systems, get a feel for the characters, get back in the world. But I don't think that this for me is much more than a stopgap before whatever's next for Zelda.
Yeah. I mean, I was always that for me, because
Yeah.
even though I hadn't played the Muso gameplay, I'm not a combat first guy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's been true through. I don't even like Pokemon battles, even though Pokemon's one of my favorite franchises of all time. So I'm still might very much enjoy this game for its visuals, for its flashiness, for the story. But I was never going to have this be my next big hype game, even though it's a Zelda game, because I didn't expect the combat to hook me, which it very well might.
Yeah.
But I'm setting my expectations low as someone who doesn't prefer
Sure.
gameplay, or combat over the other elements of gameplay. But we'll see. We'll see how this game pulls me in when I have access to the full thing. I think it's cool that this demo is going to carry over progress, so I don't have to replay those first few missions. But I'll probably end up actually beating the second mission before I get the full game. But I might put that a little bit before I actually get the game, right, as opposed to just going back and beating it right after we finish this.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think just to wrap up, the gameplay is really fun, but it feels incredibly familiar. The story is not arcing in trajectory I'm particularly compelled by. So I actually find a compulsion to get back into the first Hyrule Warriors
Okay.
and play all of the content that I still haven't, all of the
Mhm.
Wind Waker content, all of the, I think, Majora's Mask content. There's a lot in that game I haven't done. And I do have my fingers crossed that we will get some content surrounding the core story mode.
Mhm.
I'd love to get a more open adventure mode like we got in the original Hyrule Warriors,
Sure.
because I think stuff like that is going to elevate the experience for me a little bit more in line with what made the first game special, assuming, as I feel like I'm fairly right in assuming that the story is not what I'm looking for. I'm hoping that it does have that other element, but that's a complete wait and see thing, and we don't have long to wait.
No, we don't. And I think that's the most exciting part about this. And I'm very glad they put out a demo to weather your expectations and to set me in on the right path to what this game is going to be. But yeah, I'm interested to see how this game is received overall. I have not personally been involved in a lot of online discussion about this game. The few people that I have heard opinions from, you and a couple people in the Discord, it seems like it's a little bit mixed on how people are feeling about certain aspects of it. But I think that could lead to compelling not controversy, but or just discussion about the game when the full thing releases.
Yeah, it'd be very interesting to see, this game being positioned as a holiday title, being positioned as this big thing, and then seeing what it ends up being. I'm confident that it'll be quality, but I'm interested if it's going to be Fire Emblem Warriors quality or Legend or Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition quality. So
Sure,
we'll see. It's a matter of time. 3
that is
weeks.
true. Yeah.
And I have to say, I was telling my roommate this, I was a little bit concerned. I'm like, how can I make this and Cyberpunk work a day apart from each other? Don't have to worry about that.
Don't have to. Thank you, Steve Project Red. That's my holiday gift.
Now it launches when I'm not even going to be within 5,000 miles of my PS4. So
Oh God.
you and Timo will do the fucking heavy lifting for that one.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us on this trip into fucking Hyrule, Baby Guardian, time travel, things of that nature. It's been fun. It's been real. We'll be back, of course, with a review after we've played the game. If Nintendo continues to drop a trailer every hour and a half, maybe we'll have another discussion pre-release. Who knows?
Yeah.
But Tucker, I want to thank you a little bit for joining me. I don't want to thank you too much because I don't want it to go to your head.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Sure. But please like this video and subscribe. I'm not asking, I'm demanding. And that's how I'm going to end the video. There's no sign off. This is a business relationship. You're going to like, you're going to subscribe, and I'm going to forget about you. Goodbye.
It's pretty scary. What are you fucking doing?
I'm adjusting the light.
Wow. Oh, look at you. Look at this. Studio lighting?
I have a dimmer switch on this shitty light that my dorm has installed. So you can go fuck yourself.
You have a fucking dimmer switch installed in yourself. Let me fucking tell you.
I don't know what that means.
That you're dull and dim and dumb.